All right, what's going on, guys? We're going to get started with the summary of markets week 39, and then we'll get into the options watch list after that. So if you guys watched our last week's video, sadly, right after we posted that video, we had some bad news come out for the markets. We had the European lockdowns, a couple of different countries in Europe were basically starting over with their lockdowns, their coronavirus lockdowns. We actually just got some new bad news just recently today for the United Kingdom, the UK. They are locking down as well. So probably going to see a continuation of a down move tomorrow into next week, especially with the election coming up. We are extremely sensitive to news, as I said last video. Sadly, when I released the last video, I told you guys that technically we were very bullish. We filled that gap. You broke above the downtrend. Like every single time frame was looking very bullish. The technicals didn't matter. Fundamental bad news came out, nuked it, and then we came down and filled these lower gaps that we mentioned in the last week's video. So now that these lower gaps have been filled, there really aren't any relevant gaps really close to us. The only gap that we really have left below us is this one down by like 290. Hopefully we don't see that gap. That would be a really brutal sell-off. But I do think with this extended bad news that we just got, and we closed below this pivot, I think we definitely could get down to this 4-hour pivot here around 317. 317 to like 315, I think, is an area that could see a lot of support. Let's go ahead and remove all this. So 317 is that support that we want to see hold. This 4-hour pivot was holding beautifully. We actually had a really strong close on Friday. It looked like it wanted to be bullish, but then again, we got bad news, so technicals don't matter. So I would say that this move is very extended. We're seeing bull divergence on a lot of different time frames. We have it on 4-hour, we have it on 1 hour. We're getting very extended from the average, right, without seeing a pretty big pullback. The problem is we just keep getting pounded by bad news and bad news and bad news. It just keeps coming. So as long as the bad news keeps flowing in, this can keep going lower. And I think the two major levels that you want to keep an eye on are the 317 pivot on SPY. I believe there was another pivot here. There's one at 304, and then we have one on the daily at 298. So those are key levels that you want to keep an eye on moving forward. We're kind of bouncing around this pivot right here, which is right around that 321 area. So if we lose this level, which I think is going to be very easy to do on Monday, you want to keep an eye on that lower pivot on 317. If any good news comes out or if the market starts to climb post-election, I would keep an eye on this gap that we created. You have a couple of gaps here. You have a gap right around 332 into 338. And then we also have a gap around 342 into 345. So keep an eye on both of those gaps. Those would be your upper targets if we do start to bounce post-election. But until the election, I wouldn't put too much money into SPY or into the markets. Just be a little careful. If you're going deep into the markets, you want to definitely have some hedges. I had to close a couple of my premium plays for a loss last week because that sell-off was so strong. We did make some money on our VIX hedge. I'm still holding my VIX hedge, so that hedge should do very well with this bad news on Monday. Besides that, I might sell some more puts on SPY, or I might take a bullish diagonal on SPY as well this week. So keep an eye on Discord. I'll post some trades that I'm looking at post-election. Gold basically did the same thing it's been doing for the past few weeks. It's just consolidating, waiting for the election, waiting for the stimulus news. I told you guys that if you wanted to pick a direction, it was going to be slightly bearish, and that's basically what happened. You had a little sell-off there. You're trying to put in a bulldog here. You can kind of see the accumulation coming in. If you do pop up here, look for that bulldog pattern. But if you do lose this level, watch around 1800 for a support. Your upper target on this would be around 1950 if it does break out. Moving on to oil, the bulldog finally failed. I told you guys that either the bottom of the bulldog or the top of the bulldog, whichever way it broke out, it was going to be pretty strong, and we broke out to the downside, and we were kind of bouncing right off this support around $35. So for right now, we don't look too bad on oil if it holds 35. The Momo is extremely bearish, though. This is a Momo pinch where both the short term and the long term are very bearish. So this could easily continue lower. If you don't reclaim this pivot around 37 by the EIA announcement on Wednesday, you probably will not reclaim it. So keep an eye on that by Wednesday. You want to get back above like 38. If you're not back above 38 by Wednesday, 34 and 32 are the obvious targets. Moving on to Bitcoin, I told you guys that it was breaking out on the daily. It looked really good on the longer time frames. We had an upper target around 13.9, which was the weekly, or was the 2019 high. So it was the 2019 high and the monthly pivot. So that level has been hit. You can see our close. Let me get rid of all these older levels. You can see our close of October was damn near exactly the same as that monthly pivot. You closed just below it. So right now we're only 1 day into November, 1 or 2 days, right? Yeah, 1 day, and we don't have any really gauge if it's going to break this pivot or not. I would say I'd be careful shorting because the momentum has been so strong recently. But if you do get back below this 4-hour pivot, back below the 4-hour trail, kind of around 13.5, then you might start to look bearish. But until then, I would be very careful trying to pick a top because the bulls have been in complete control for the past like 2-3 weeks. So be careful. Ethereum, basically the same story. It's just not breaking out as much as Bitcoin. But the bulls have been in control for the most of October. Once they started breaking out, you did have a little bit of a pullback here on the end of October, but it looks like we are starting to reclaim that level. You had a buy signal come in on the daily on the OTS trail. You are flipping back from red to gray, so green will come soon. You're back above that range high as well. So this does look pretty bullish. You can see the weekly momentum is climbing. The 4-hour has an inverse head and shoulders breaking out to the upside right now. So it looks pretty bullish. As long as you maintain above this uptrend here on the inverse head and shoulders, I think this can continue higher. So keep an eye on that uptrend. Keep an eye on the neckline, which is right around this pivot. The pivot is almost the exact neckline. If you reclaim this pivot to the downside, then I would be bearish. Until then, you would be bullish into 404 and then the pivot around 416. Okay? That is the summary of markets. Let's move on to the options watch list. This is going to be a very short watch list because we do have the election this week, and I'm not planning on taking really any big trades until the election decision has been announced, because 99% of the time they announce the winner the same day. They're saying that might not be the case this time because of all the early voting, the mail-in voting, all that stuff. They said it could be delayed, so I have no idea. I'm just going to wait and see how it plays out. But I'm not going to be taking really any big directional trades until the election is decided. I am currently in some puts that I'm selling on SPY, but I've basically been selling every single week on SPY. That's been working out for the most part, except for last week. Unless we have black swan events like we did last week, and we're going to see it again this week because of the bad news. My selling strategy works pretty much every week, as long as we don't have black swans. So I might take a hit this week, but I am properly hedged. So I'm more hedged this week than I was last time, so I should be okay. But I'm probably not going to take any trades until after the election, since we are 2 days away. It's going to be on Tuesday, and then we hopefully will know the winner by Tuesday, maybe by Friday at the latest. So I'll probably hold off on taking a lot of options trades. And for the most part, there's not really too many levels that I can give you. We can take a look at the big stock companies. Actually, before we do that, let's look at NEO. NEO is one that has been exploding recently. You broke out of that pivot, nice little breakout, and we have a micro pullback coming in. So NEO likes to break out in a very quick move and then consolidate for a long period of time. So we had the breakout. Very unlikely to just break out again because that's not what NEO does. So keep an eye on NEO. It might consolidate. As long as you stay above the previous high, as you did these past 4 other times, it will continue higher. I think NEO has a very strong bet to see $50 by the end of next year. So that is my very long-term target on NEO is $50. And you can basically just trade it all the way up as it's climbing. Now, they do have earnings coming up very soon. And we do have a little bit of a bear div forming. So we might pull back to retest that previous high. But keep an eye on a pullback around $28. Anything above 28 could be very bullish. Besides that, there aren't too many companies that I'm keeping an eye on besides the tech companies. Let's take a look at the tech companies here. So Microsoft, we're finally breaking out of this like range that we've been in, or we tried to at least. We tried to break downward, but we're not seeing continuation. So we had earnings, you broke downward back into this range, but you're bouncing off that low. So if you take a range here, kind of where the head is on the head and shoulders, we can see where we're ending up. We're right around the lows, right around 197 is the level I've been talking about for a few weeks now. As long as you stay above 197, this accumulation should continue. We are probably going to see a sell-off on the markets tomorrow, so it might pull back into that 197 level, so keep an eye on that. So Apple, you lost the daily pivot on Apple, and it looks like you want to continue lower. Earnings was not as good as people wanted it to be, so you did see a little bit of a sell-off. So if we do take this gap right here down to 96, that could be where we're heading right now. So as long as this downtrend holds, that gap is your overall target. So keep an eye on the pivot, keep an eye on this downtrend. Until you reclaim these levels, you're very likely going to continue downward into that gap. Same thing with Facebook. You're kind of coming back to retest this lower, the head of the head and shoulders. We failed the neckline, reclaimed it bearishly, and we're probably going to come back down. Facebook also has a big gap here. So if we take the gap that has not been filled, it would be all the way down to here. So if this wants to continue lower, keep an eye on this overall trend. We've already broken this uptrend right here. So if you don't reclaim this uptrend by, say, Wednesday after the election, very likely going to continue lower down into that gap around 230 to 240, excuse me. So Netflix was looking really good. Very, very strong day until we saw that sell-off on the markets on Friday. You were holding the pivot. You started rocketing up on the news that they were raising their prices for most of their subscribers. You almost filled that gap, but you were not able to fill that. So now we're back below the daily pivot. The obvious target would be the kind of range low right here. If you wanted to take the range low, we're basically almost there already. That would be the obvious target. And then the point of origin right around here would be your next target. So what is that? 466 and then 446 until you reclaim that pivot. If you reclaim that pivot on the 4 hour, very likely going to continue higher back into that gap fill around 525. But keep an eye on this post-election. Amazon, same story, coming back down to retest the head and shoulders, the head of the head and shoulders. We have a little bit of a gap that has not been filled, I believe, if you zoom in really closely. So that would be your obvious target. And then you have a little bit of a point of origin down here around 2,700. That would be a pretty brutal sell-off for Amazon. I don't think we'll get that level. Very likely to find support somewhere around this head here. Do we have any pivots down there? Yeah, we have a pivot right there around 2,900. So keep an eye on that pivot. As long as that pivot holds, very unlikely to see 2,700. Last but not least would be Tesla. We came back down to this this pivot. I told you guys in Discord many times that it looked like it wanted to come down to that 375 pivot, and that's basically exactly what it did. 375 pivot was almost tested to the dollar, and it looks like it's bouncing a little bit. I don't think this bounce will last very long. I think it's going to break this pivot, or at least come down and give it a true test on Monday or Tuesday. So keep an eye on that. If the pivot fails, you would keep an eye on this level right around here, 358, because that was a high previously where we started breaking out of, and we found support multiple times around that level. Okay. Those are all the things that I'm watching. Like I said, I would not be trading too heavily until we at least get election results. So stay safe this week, guys. I'll see you guys in Discord tomorrow. You guys have a good one. Peace out.